The American Civil War ended in 1865, and the nation celebrated by immediately getting back to its favorite pastime. This wasn't your grandpa's economy of small farms and local blacksmiths. This was the Gilded Age, a chaotic explosion of railroads, factories, and steel mills. Out of this glorious, unregulated mess crawled the men we lovingly call the robber barons. They were sold to the public as captains of industry, the ultimate self-made men who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. A lovely story, except most of them started with significant advantages, and their bootstraps were often the necks of their competitors. The government, bless its heart, was mostly busy looking the other way, creating the perfect petri dish for a new species of corporate life form to evolve, the monopoly. Let's start with Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, a man who treated business like a bar fight and looked the part. He got his start in steamships, but saw that the real money was in owning the steel arteries of the nation, the railroads. He didn't invent anything, he just perfected the art of hostile takeovers. His masterpiece? The 1867 blockade of the Albany Bridge, the only rail bridge into New York City. By simply refusing to let any other trains cross, he crippled his rivals, tanked their stock, and then bought them for pennies on the dollar. He held the entire commerce of America's largest city hostage until he got what he wanted. It wasn't genius, it was just realizing that if you own the only bridge, you can charge whatever toll you like. Then there was John D. Rockefeller, a devout Baptist who saw the chaotic early oil industry and thought it offended God himself. To him, competition was a sin, and his holy mission was to bring order to the chaos. The order, of course, would be him owning everything. In 1870, he founded Standard Oil of Ohio. At the time, he controlled about 4% of the country's oil refining. Just 2 years later, after a campaign of intimidation and buyouts known as the Cleveland Massacre, he controlled 25%. By the 1880s, it was 90%. He didn't do it with a better product, he did it with ruthless efficiency, industrial espionage, and a complete and total lack of sentiment. So how do you own 90% of an industry without technically creating a single illegal monopoly? Simple. You invent a new legal toy. Rockefeller's lawyer, Samuel Dodd, came up with a brilliant, legally dubious idea called the trust. Here's how it worked. Stockholders of dozens of competing oil companies would hand over their stock to a small board of trustees. The board, run by Rockefeller, would control all the companies as a single entity. The companies were still legally separate, so it wasn't a monopoly. They just all happened to be controlled by the exact same 9 guys. It was a loophole so big you could drive a freight train full of money through it, and they did. Standard Oil's business plan was beautiful in its brutality. First, they'd enter a new town and offer kerosene at a price so low it was almost free. The local refiner, unable to compete, would face a choice: sell his business to Standard Oil for a fraction of its value, or go bankrupt. Most sold. To make this work, Rockefeller negotiated secret illegal rebates with the railroads. He paid less to ship his oil, while his competitors paid more. The railroads even gave him a drawback, a cut of the money his competitors paid to ship their own oil. They were literally paying him to put themselves out of business. It's the corporate equivalent of making your opponent punch himself in the face. While Rockefeller was mastering the horizontal monopoly, owning all of one stage of production, Andrew Carnegie was composing a symphony of steel with vertical integration. Carnegie didn't just want to make the best steel, he wanted to own the entire process, from dirt to skyscraper. He bought the iron ore mines in Minnesota. He bought the ships to carry the ore across the Great Lakes. He bought the railroads to haul it from the docks to his mills in Pittsburgh. He even owned the coal fields that powered the furnaces. By controlling every single step, he could cut costs to a level no competitor could ever match. It wasn't a business, it was a self-contained money-printing ecosystem. The great defense for these monopolies was that they were efficient. They lowered prices for consumers. And for a time, prices on things like kerosene and steel did drop. But this came at a cost. Once all competition was eliminated, what was to stop them from jacking prices up to whatever they wanted? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You had the illusion of choice, with different brand names on the shelf, but follow the money and it all led back to the same boardroom in New York. The free market had produced a situation that was the exact opposite of free. It was a handful of kings ruling over industries, and everyone else just paid the tax. You might be wondering, where was the government in all this? The answer is simple. It was on the payroll. The Gilded Age Senate wasn't called the Millionaires Club for nothing. Senators were openly referred to by the monopolies they represented. The senator from Standard Oil, or the senator from the New York Central Railroad. They weren't hiding it. When legislation was proposed to regulate railroads, railroad baron Leland Stanford got himself elected to the Senate from California just to kill it. These men weren't just influencing the government. For all practical purposes, they were the government. They had simply outsourced the paperwork. Finally, after decades of people complaining that maybe, just maybe, having all of society's wealth controlled by a dozen guys, Congress acted. In 1890, they passed the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was a landmark piece of legislation that declared any restraint of trade or commerce illegal. Sounds great, right? Powerful. Except the language was so wonderfully vague that nobody knew what it actually meant. For its first decade, the act was mostly used to crush labor unions, because a worker strike, you see, was clearly an illegal conspiracy in restraint of trade. In the 1895 case, United States versus E.C. Nightco, the Supreme Court ruled that a sugar trust controlling 98% of the market was fine because it was in manufacturing, not commerce. A truly brilliant distinction that kept the monopolists sleeping soundly. Enter Theodore Roosevelt, a man with more energy than a steam engine and a fantastic mustache. History paints him as the great trust buster, smashing monopolies with his big stick. The reality is a bit more nuanced. Roosevelt wasn't against bigness, he was against badness. He made a distinction between good trusts and bad trusts. His administration launched 44 antitrust suits, a big step up. But his goal wasn't to break up corporations, it was to make them behave. His most famous case against J.P. Morgan's Northern Securities Railroad conglomerate in 1902 was a signal. It told the robber barons that the federal government was now a player at the table, not just a waiter taking their orders. The big showdown came in 1911, Standard Oil Co. of New Jersey v. United States. The Supreme Court, using its rule of reason, decided that yes, Standard Oil was an unreasonable monopoly and had to be broken up. Victory! The little guy won! Except Not really. Standard Oil was split into 34 separate companies, which sounds dramatic. But the ownership of those new companies was distributed proportionally to the shareholders of the old company. So John D. Rockefeller, who owned a quarter of Standard Oil, now owned a quarter of Exxon, a quarter of Mobil, a quarter of Chevron, and so on. His personal wealth didn't shrink, it exploded. He became the world's first billionaire because his monopoly was broken up. The system was so perfectly designed that even losing was a winning move. So, what's the lesson from America's first dance with monopolies? That unchecked capitalism, driven by a few very ambitious, morally flexible individuals, tends to consolidate. They didn't break any laws, mostly because they were the ones getting the laws written. They controlled the infrastructure, bought or buried the competition, and sold the public a story about progress and efficiency. The Gilded Age playbook was so effective, you might even see echoes of it today. Companies that own the platform, the marketplace, and the delivery service. Companies that acquire hundreds of potential competitors before they can become a threat. It's almost like human nature hasn't changed that much in 130 years. Shocking, I know. History isn't a straight line of progress. It's more of a circle, or maybe a spiral, and we just keep spiraling. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!